Record. Okay, we're gonna tie probably my favorite Great Lakes smallmouth bass fly. This is Nick's Goby fly. Doesn't have a very creative name, but that's okay. It fishes really, really well. The origin of this fly came from fishing up in Georgian Bay, Lake Huron, some of that clear water where the invasive brown goby has taken over. And the smallmouth bass have really taken note and they feed on them quite voraciously. This fly came out of a trip I was taking with a conventional angler, and I was very jealous at a lot of the fish that this angler was catching on a very light colored tube jig. I went back to the drawing board, started tying all kinds of very ginger, tan colored woolly buggers, and nothing really seemed to match the success of my friend's tube jig. It wasn't until I stumbled across this one and I tried to emulate that thicker head of a goby or even a tube jig, and this pattern was born. Essentially, it's a Clouser minnow tied in a very accurate color representation of a goby. But what makes this a really effective fly is that really large profile, very reminiscent of your gobies. That craft fur moves really well in the water, and it's a very accurate representation of what the smallmouth bass are seeing day in and day out. Ways to fish this fly: you can fish it on an intermediate line if the bass are very shallow. As the bass push off some of those very shallow rock piles, you might want to go to something like a type 5, even a type 6 line, and just jig this anywhere you think you can find smallmouth bass, and I can almost guarantee that you're going to have some success with it. It's been really, really great for us. I know a number of people at the shop, as well as some of the guide operations, have had a lot of success fishing this fly. So we're going to tie it. All right, so the hook we're going to use, this is an Ahrex TP650. This is that hook that has a 26-degree bend in it. I like this hook in a size 2. Size 4 would also work. You could also go up to a size 1, but size 2 is kind of the medium range, so we're going to stick with that today. It's got that 26-degree bend, which we're going to put some lead eyes on the hook. It's going to ride upside down just like your typical Clouser minnow would ride. And that extra little 26-degree bend just kind of helps it along to function more like a jig. So that's why we're using this hook. It's also nice and sturdy. It's got a really good gap in between it, so lots of hooking ability for fish like a smallmouth bass. We are going to use a 6/0 thread is fine. You know, your moderate size thread. Color isn't that important. I have an olive thread here today. You could use tan or something else just to match the color of the fly. So I'm just getting my thread started. And I'm going to place the lead eyes, not at the very front of the hook, like say that. I'm going to place them back a little bit, right where it starts to bend. We're not going to put much material at all ahead of the eyes. So I'm going to secure the eyes really right where that bend of that hook is. So a couple quick wraps. And then I'm going to crisscross and get those eyes nice and secure. And these are just your small size lead eyes. You could also use medium size if you wanted a little bit more weight. I don't really suggest going down to like say or going up to a large size lead eye. I find that might be a little bit too heavy. Most of the presentation that you're going to be fishing is relying on your sinking line for bringing that fly down. So a small size to a medium size lead eye is perfect for this pattern. So a couple crisscross wraps, a couple of wraps around the bottom. And that's going to secure our eyes so they don't go anywhere, just like that. Next step is you're going to put a bit of a tail on this fly. And every time you're tying this and all through the pattern, just remember that it's going to be riding this way. So the bottom of the hook is actually the top of the fly. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to put a little bit of craft fur as a tail. This is the sand or tan. Either of those two would work fine. And that's just your typical craft fur. And the thing I like about this fly is that it's very sparse. So it does sink very well, but it also looks just like that very light colored goby that the Great Lakes are now being invaded by. And so the idea is not to put a ton of material on this fly. Once I get that wrapped on, I'm just going to clean things up a little bit with my thread. And like sculpins or any other bait fish, gobies tend to be a two-toned color. So I do like using a white or a cream colored craft fur as a bit of a belly on the fly. So I'm just going to put a little bit of white craft fur like that and secure it down. Doesn't have to look pretty at this stage. All right, so remember, it is going to be riding like that. Okay, and all those loose fibers are all secured. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to be using a little bit of ice dub. That's the pearl color. What that's going to do is just add a little bit of flash in the fly. I don't like a lot of flash. Gobies, sculpins, those bottom dwelling minnows, they don't tend to be very flashy. A little bit of pearl dub is going to bleed through some of that craft fur and just provide you with a little bit of a trigger, a little bit of a flash. And a little bit of ice dub just seems to be the perfect amount of flash in a fly like this. And you can put it on a little loose, some of those fibers sticking out, they're only going to help you. But what you should do is when you're tying, leave a little bit of space in between the eyes and your body material. I've actually crowded it a little bit there, but it's okay. We have more than enough because we are going to put a bit of a head on that fly. So next thing we're going to do, I'm going to flip it upside down. Whenever you're taking craft fur, there's usually a little bit of an under fur there. So you can see I've just pulled some of that out. That's just because I want the longer fibers on that. And this here is going to be the belly. Really all I'm doing here is tying an overcomplicated Clouser minnow. Also a very good bass fly. Put a little bit more belly material. So you're keeping things sparse, not too heavy on the material because we do want this to sink. And the gobies, they're not that robust of a bait fish, not quite like a sculpin, say. Now here's our sand or tan color craft fur again. And then this is going to go on the top of the fly when the hook point is up. Okay, and really you want this fly to be about 2.5 to 3 inches long is about perfect. Okay. And a good thing about this pattern is that you can lose a lot of them because it is a very simple fly to tie. There's only a couple materials. It doesn't take too long to fill a box with these. That's the idea because you are going to be fishing these in the rocks and the bottom, exactly where you're going to find a big old smallmouth bass. All right, so we're actually almost done now. All right, looks pretty good like that. So what have we done? We've really tied a Clouser minnow with a little bit of flash in the belly. But what makes this fly a little bit more unique is the next step that we're going to do, and we're going to put a bit of a head on it. So gobies, they're a bottom-dwelling bait fish. They got a fat little head on them, and I think that fat head and using a material to sort of emulate that silhouette or that profile is really what makes this fly special. I've done this with a lot of different materials. I know previously I've done a tying presentation where I used possum. I have a fly right here that did use the possum material. I've done it with coyote fur, where I've put it in a dubbing brush and spun it around into a dubbing brush, and that has been my head on the fly. But what I've really come to love, and just having no time to tie flies and wanting to expedite the process, is using an actual brush. So that's an EP Foxy brush in the 1.5 inch size. And that color is coyote. So it's actually, I believe it's coyote fur, even though it's called a Foxy brush. But it also has some EP fiber built into it. And what that does is it creates a nice bulk, keeps your profile even when the fly's wet, and it looks just like those gobies, and it works really well. So I'm just gonna tie in the brush. As you can see, I've left just a little bit of a space between the eyes and where I've been working with my thread. So now this is even easier than making your own dubbing brush. You just use the pre-bought one. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna wind around the hook, stroking the fibers backwards. And what that does is that will create a nice, robust head on this fly. Be careful you don't trap fibers. You want to make sure that they are sticking out at the sides. And we're gonna go right up to the very end there of where we have our lead eyes. When you get there, you're gonna tie it off. And I'm still tying off behind the eyes. I don't like it when it's covering the eyes. And you could either twist that off, or if you're using Chris's scissors, you can go right ahead and cut the wire. And that's 90% of the fly done. So I have a little bit of a head there, just ahead of the barbell eyes. But essentially, that's our fly. We're gonna do one more step in just a second. So I'm just gonna half hitch this off. As our last step, gobies tend to have a bit of a barring, just like a sculpin might. And so I'm gonna use actually like a magic marker, or not a magic marker, a Sharpie. And you can use either a gold or a bronze colored, depending on your preference or what you find. And I'm gonna just bar down the sides of the fly or the back of the fly to give it a little bit more realistic look. Whenever you're using magic markers on your fly patterns, I usually say less is more. So don't go very heavy-handed with the marker. You can't undo permanent marker, especially on fly tying materials. So just putting a mark down the fly, even spaces, will make it look like an actual real goby. So I usually do this in my hand, but it would be very hard for you to see me doing that. So I'm gonna attempt to do it just while it's in the vise. So typically what I'll do is I'll just pull the material very tight, and I'll just dab the top of the marker on the craft fur as I go down. And I think that looks pretty good. Didn't quite get some on this side, so I'll just follow my marks like that. I think that looks pretty good. So they're not very thick markings on the fly. They're actually quite light, but I think that just gives the illusion of a mottled goby. And really the special thing about this fly is that when you're fishing those light bottoms for those smallmouth bass that are very used to feeding on gobies, this really matches the silhouette of the fly, or the natural, perfectly. It's also that perfect color of that sandy bottom where you find a lot of these smallmouth bass, especially as you're coming into early July on Georgian Bay, Lake Ontario, and Lake Erie. And I really think that if you tie that up, you're going to be really surprised with the results. All right, so that is my favorite smallmouth bass fly for the Great Lakes. That's the goby fly. I hope you tie it. I hope it is great for you. And if you have some success on it, reach out to me anytime. Best way to get a hold of me is through Instagram. You'll find me at Salmographer on there. And yeah, I hope you love the fly and you fish it and it's great for you.